second annual global platform of leading electricity distribution operators. Session 3 today is coming after obviously 1 and 2 that we held yesterday, and is devoted to watching the Mediterranean coasts and southwards. So the big discussions on Africa's electrification and use of distribution grids in all ways that is undergoing in the country and in the continent. So let me, before going to the content and to the and to the keynotes, let me just give you a recap of yesterday. Or do we have the housekeeping rules first? Yeah, exactly. So some housekeeping rules are very much to be observed. Participants can place their questions directly through the platform on the chat or on the question and answers feature that you find there. They will be used by the moderators to implement the discussion. Then please, if not done automatically, indicate your name and company when posting your question. The moderator will be selecting or bundling the questions, and as said, use them in the discussion. The raise hand feature will not be activated. So the only way to interact is chat and the Q&A feature. So this said, can we go please to a recap of the first session on how to target net zero was held yesterday morning. The keynotes did concentrate on evaluating the European effort to take the lead on smart grid technologies, and we had there Christian Buchel, the chair of E.DSO, whom recapped what is going on. Fit for 55, digitalization, sustainability and reliability of the network as the most important elements to focus on. He elaborated also on the prices of energy and the role of the E.DSO in the current surge of prices around Europe. Then we had Antonio Camisecra, the head of Enel Infrastructure and Network at global level, whom elaborated on cooperation among energy actors as the key element to reach net zero, as well as coordinating the efforts among DSOs on the evolution of infrastructures. Antonio also delivered some piece of news on concrete actions on how to limit emission and how to contribute to a better sustainability of the grids, elaborating on the SF6 gases use and implementation in the Enel group, and also described the value of sharing the knowledge with other DSOs. It was extremely interesting to have a view on the commitment of a large company to implement this innovative and sustainable solution, by definition for a decarbonized world. Then we had the Asian panel, where the Tokyo Electric power grid elaborated on customer-sited renewables, storage, and smart load technology as elements of Japan's net zero strategy. India, the CEO of Tata explained how the commitment of Tata to go net zero by 2050 was going to be implemented. And that was also of extreme interest to see how the problems and the strategy of a large Indian company were very much aligned with the same problems that all companies of those dimensions have around the world. Geographic implication saved, of course, and being considered. Next slide, please. Then we had from Korea, Dr. Shin from KEPCO, delivering a full view of the Korean strategy to net zero, but also proposing a totally deregulated experiment to be run on a South Korea island, so that the newest form of grid technique and relationship with customers could be experimented. This also was very much, let's say, inspiring for the discussion. From China, we focused on net zero strategy on China with Dr. Shang, and the analysis of activities as China EPRI to face some energy distribution challenges in the country. Here emerged also a good evaluation of the implication of a stronger and stricter approach to cybersecurity for the grids. A discussion followed, but I wanted to tell you that the recording of this session is fully available on the website of the global.EPRI.org. And now I'm asking Mark McGranaghan, who was the moderator of session 2, to recap it. Mark, you have the floor.
Great. Thanks, Roberto. A very robust discussion in session 2 from both North and South America, but starting with some keynote presentation, Torsten Knopp from E.ON kind of set the stage talking about resilience and some of the experience that of Germany with the 2021 floods and that being an eye-opening event in terms of investments for resiliency being important in Europe as well as other places, and development of approaches for all aspects of resilience, from avoiding the impacts of major events like that to recovering from those events, and how digitalization can play a role in that as well. So very interesting start to the importance of resilience. Then we had Kelly Speaks Bachman, who is the Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Energy, and her presentation was very interesting in the grid modernization strategy of the Department of Energy, focusing on a sector-based priorities rather than technology-based priorities. And they identified the 5 sectors where they need to prioritize decarbonization approaches. And of course, the electric system plays a role in all these sectors, whether it's transportation, the grid itself, or transportation, or industrial sector, and agricultural sector, and buildings. So, and she emphasized also the continued role of energy efficiency and kind of the new role of energy equity, and making sure that as we make investments for both resilience and decarbonization, that we make sure that we do this in a way that kind of benefits all consumers, and we don't leave anyone behind in that process. So that's a very important priority in the U.S. Then finally, in the keynotes, Juan Rios gave us from Iberdrola linked work in the both Europe and South America, and how climate impacts is influencing the required investments in resilience of the grids, and gave some examples of the cold and snow events in Spain and the impacts that had, and other examples in the UK and the US. So climate change and the impacts on investment requirements for resilience was kind of a theme that flowed through there. Then we got into, on the next slide, the panel discussion, and we started with a panel around North America, and was kicked off by Lawrence Jones from the Edison Electric Institute. He's in charge of their international programs and really provided a global perspective on the role of DSOs. He had an emphasis on supply chain issues as digitalization becomes a huge priority for our industry. We're going to be subject to some of these supply chain issues as well, and we have to keep that in mind. And also on the issue of complexity, he really focused on the need for understanding the complexity of the interrelationships of customers and communities and the grid, and how we're going to model this and make that part of our planning for the future. Vishal Patel from Southern California Edison gave a great. Southern California Edison has a 2045 vision to become net zero. They've published some public documents that are really valuable in terms of their roadmap to get there. And Vishal went through some of that as they go down their decarbonization path, have tremendous resiliency challenges, especially with wildfires, and are seeing the impacts of electric transportation adoption at a very fast rate. And unlike many parts of the U.S. where we really have systems that are designed for air conditioning and can handle a lot of additional electric transportation load, a lot of the areas along the coast for Southern California Edison don't have that luxury, and they are really impacted by the additional load and the investment requirements. Paul Gauguin is in the Midwest in the U.S., in Wisconsin, and they're going through a major grid modernization strategy that involves both renewables and working with customers, but also significant investment in the grid and undergrounding for reliability and resiliency. So traditional investments along with digitalization strategies. They've been one of the leaders in reliability. They've won awards for the reliability of their grid and the investments they've made in automation. So another great example. And then finally, Matt Chechki from Con Edison in New York, talking about a very dense urban grid and the state of New York approach to creating a DSO that can provide a platform for integration of customers and the community, and the leadership that Con Edison is taking in building local markets for demand response and customers to participate in flexibility requirements of the grid and their vision for going forward. So was really some great presentations that I think we can all learn from. Then we went to South America, and on the next slide, and had three excellent presentations, starting with Mr. Castaneda from Iberdrola, and talking about the from Enel, and talking about the creation of a new organization in South America that's kind of a parallel to E.DSO in Europe, and where the distribution organizations can get together and talk about what it means to be a DSO and share in technology and experiences and learning from each other. And the investments for resilience and reliability will be a big part of that discussion in this new organization, ADELAT. And so that was a very interesting opportunity for cooperation between the distribution companies in South America. Then we had the presentation from Mr. Carretto from EREDIs and EDP, and talked about their investment requirements, really worldwide investment requirements to meet the digitalization requirements as part of the combination of decarbonization and resiliency requirements of the future as we electrify more and more of the energy sector. And that EDP sees that across both continents, and was a great example. And then finally, the last presentation from South America, from GEB, the utility that serves Bogota and Colombia. And amazingly, that the priorities are really the same as everywhere else in the world. And so they're seeing investments in decarbonization, digitalization of the grid, meeting the requirements of electrification, and through all that, maintaining resiliency and reliability. So that was really good, interesting to see that these priorities are really the same everywhere around the world. I'm looking forward to hearing about these priorities as we look at Africa and the Mediterranean as well. I'll just say as we wrap things up that kind of three things came through to me in both the sessions yesterday. One is that the investment challenges that we have to meet this kind of three-legged stool of DER integration and prosumers, electrification requirements, and while doing that, meeting resiliency and reliability requirements, that those investment challenges are the same everywhere in the world. And as we had the discussion, really the importance of regulatory innovation and regulatory approaches to enable those investments and do the cost benefit analysis, and that is really going to require a lot of new thinking from a regulatory perspective. The second thing is technology and digitalization to make those investments as effectively as possible. That is changing so fast, and it's hard for our industry to keep up with that. But that's an absolute requirement that we look at those technologies and figure out where they make the most sense. And a third thing that came out in the discussion was the need for metrics. As we look at investments in resiliency and reliability, we really need metrics that regulators and all the stakeholders can use to evaluate those investments. And those metrics are going to need to include things like energy equity and affordability issues, as well as Kelly Speaks-Bachman described. So those are three really important conclusions that I saw from the discussion, and I look forward to today's discussion, Roberto.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was a great wrap-up of session 2. The recordings of session 2 will be available later this afternoon on the global.DSO.org website, but we shall put it in the chat anyway, so you have an easy link to reach. So now, without further ado, may I ask to the screen our first keynote, Mr. Vincenzo Ranieri.
Good morning, Roberto.
Hi, good morning. A pleasure to see you, Vincenzo, and thank you for your time this morning. Vincenzo Ranieri is the president of the E.DSO entity and is managing Enel Distribuzione in Italy. Vincenzo, you have the floor for your keynote, which will be focusing on shaping the curve and fostering the largest need of distributed electricity. Please.
Thank you, Roberto, and good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here sharing our common view about such essential topic, both for European countries and Mediterranean countries in general, that is the need of the electrification of consumption and of an efficient and resilient system to distribute clean energy everywhere, all the time. That is definitely the essential service that we provide and we have to provide, and to everyone. This statement is as true as climate change is hitting hard all over the world, but we are well aware that these extreme conditions are particularly affecting the Mediterranean countries, testing society, and in some cases we know that are fueling even social disorders and emigration. The energy sector is definitely a key contributor to climate change, accounting for more than 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. And working on electrical grids efficiency shall give a contribution, a relevant contribution to tackle climate change, reaching, as was well commented yesterday by Mr. Bushell, the COP26 targets to reduce emissions and foster a just and fair energy transition. For this reason, I'm really glad to be here with some of the representatives of African power industries and associations like Race for Africa that works in support of Africa's just energy transition to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goal. The path to reach a resilient, affordable and sustainable energy ecosystem require a great effort to develop and deploy the best and new technologies needed. Africa and Europe do not start from the same technological level of power infrastructures. This is something that we all know. But of course, not every country, neither in Europe nor in Africa, or not every DSO are at the same level in terms of experience or, as Mark was recalling, regulatory constraints that would require also reshape, or even in terms of technology. But definitely, for sure, all Mediterranean countries are moving in the same direction, that is to shape a more sustainable future for every citizen, unlocking the potential of building smart infrastructure and definitely smart grids that see in Europe the relevant and probably the most important incubator of such new technology for network infrastructures. Our two continents are approaching same challenges because the paradigm of big power plants connecting to transmission grids is rapidly shifting. The world is facing a sharp decrease of the average size of installed power by 6 times. And we foresee that by 2050, more than 2 plants out of 2 would be smaller than today and connected to distribution networks. This is one of the main reasons why DSOs, the distribution system operators, will be more and more pivotal along the energy chain. And as Mr. Timmermans said at the EU-Africa Business Forum last April, Africa is facing a paradox. While African countries are among the world's richest in sustainable energy resources, more or less 600 people still do not have access to electricity today. And this is, of course, an inconsistency that must be overcome. And just quoting Mr. Timmermans, we must think big, helping the economic development and industrialization of Africa. It is truly important to make available the best technological solutions, know-how and ideas to foster true penetration of electricity and electrification consumption towards southern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And in this respect, building a reliable infrastructure that can serve African people will be useful to build increasingly more renewable energy plants, integrating them both in urban and rural grids and helping to reduce the cost of energy. This is the sort of virtuous circle that took in Europe probably 20, 30 years, but leveraging on the experience that we had in Europe, we must even give a contribution to accelerate, to boost this virtuous circle also in the other Mediterranean countries. We will contribute to reach those targets, enforcing the role of distribution grids, making them one of the fundamental pillars of the green economy. The recognition of the centricity of DSOs brought the European Commission to create a new entity, the E.DSO entity, that I have the honor to chair, to contribute to accelerate the crucial UN targets and making the just energy transition fair for all the citizens. Our aim is putting together all European DSOs and to give a unique voice to the needs of 260 million European citizens. Europe has the determination to drive the energy transition towards a fully decarbonized society within 2050. And of course, we want to accelerate, having posed a very ambitious target just by 2030. They are very ambitious, but definitely the effort and the action of all the European stakeholders, including, of course, DSOs, are making those targets really achievable. Of course, to have one unique single voice and one unique single entity that have contributed to define the new European network codes, to share best practices and to strengthen the cooperation between all energy stakeholders is definitely a powerful tool to nurture and just a fair green transition for all the citizens. We want to share with you this newly raised but strong voice, sharing our cooperation platforms in an open way that can be useful for both sides, promoting development and a strong distribution network for African electricity system. Our countries and our continents will be even more interconnected, not only by our similar cultural heritage, but also by the way we will use the energy in the near future. That's why we need to exchange our expertise and knowledge, as this occasion is giving us the chance to do, and for which I want to thank the EPRI, Eurelectric, and our association E.DSO. I firmly believe that a reliable distribution grid in all the Mediterranean countries is the best way to foster the industrialization of the continent and rising its economy. We would be glad to share with you our expertise and know-how in the way where every African countries could reach a faster electrification, learning even from our mistake, because definitely there is an adaptation times that we took in European countries, and we can optimize this learning curve in other Mediterranean countries in order to leapfrog in the reaching of reliable and sustainable electrical services to African customers. The year that a year to come will be really a great but even exciting challenge, and I hope that occasion like today meeting will be the first step of a bridge towards the Mediterranean Sea. I would like that this bridge will be built on common values, but even on a very pragmatic cooperation for a more sustainable and electrified world, promoting clean and resilient energy really for everyone. And having said that, I want to thank you again, Roberto, and all the organization, because this kind of discussion would really bring the cooperation from more ideal bridge to a very pragmatic and concrete way of cooperation and discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo, for your words and for the commitment you show on this topic. Obviously, E.DSO wants to become the natural partner for the evolution of this kind of topic, and certainly to be among the building stones of the bridge you mentioned. Thank you very much again. And now let's welcome on the floor Roberto Vigotti. Roberto is Secretary General of RES for Africa, and will give us an insight, let's say, on the field of what are the challenges and opportunities for urban and peri-urban electricity provision on the continent. Roberto, we wait to leverage on your experience to have a framework of this important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Roberto. Thank you, the audience. Thank you for the invitation. I understand. Okay, I have a few slides that will be moved by the assistants. I call this presentation the challenge and opportunity for accelerating access to electricity in African grids. I will use a few slides because I think it makes the point. Next slide, for instance, tell you something very obvious, that in the next years, 50% or 59% of African population will live in big cities. Therefore, additionally, 950 million people will be living in urban areas, and 7 out of 10 fastest growing city will be in Africa. This is not negative because, you know, this is what happened also in Europe and also everywhere. The people from rural areas go to the city to find new jobs because we need less workload in the rural areas. But that has to be carefully planned, and that's why it's so important that distribution makes this planning and executing the need of the people. Next slide shows, unfortunately, the situation today. The challenge of African electricity are here. You see, in theory, the overall electricity access is in some country 100%. Think about Kenya as a large number still, but then you see the middle column, the consumption, and you see in Kenya people use very, very little electricity. The fact that the two numbers to combine together, you cannot just use one because the connection doesn't mean that you use it. Like you're having a car, and you park the car in your garage, you never use it, so you never do any kilometers. So the issue has been also aggravating because what the IEA says is that even because of the COVID, even 30 million people in Africa who were actually electrified are not using electricity because they cannot afford it. So this is a dramatic also number that we have to take care. And finally, the quality, we all know the quality, not only in the Mediterranean, but also in Africa, of the outage and load shedding is so bad that you see the average world is the black line, that we imagine that between 2 and 4% of GDP is lost annually because of the poor quality of the distribution network. And of course, this is something that requires then the firms that adopt diesel generator to make the load. Next slide also shows you the situation that we see. Now, we see that urban electricity access is much higher than rural. The rate of electrification in urban areas is 78% more or less, while in rural areas at 27%. This means that there's a misconception that access to energy is actually mainly for rural areas. Even the IEA, when they use the word access to energy, they talk about mini grids and rural off-grid. I think access is broader. In fact, today we're going to underline that access to energy is mostly distributed line and urban access. But therefore, also an additional one, sometimes we see people living near a grid. It doesn't mean that people are connected. There are 110 million people living under the grid who don't benefit. That's why we also are exploiting, together with our member, some possibility to increase the access with like a smart extension, serving the percentage of the new power plants the people living around. Next slide also shows a very easy picture. This is in Johannesburg, but I can show you hundreds of pictures of big city in Africa. On the left, you see a California style quarter of Johannesburg. On the right, you see the slums and the people. Now you can imagine by just watching this picture, the quality of service you can get from the two areas and the challenge you have. So next slide is also, please. A question, why the households are not connected then? Well, the upfront payment to connect the grid are very high in comparison with the income of the household. Let's not forget that these are prices which the people have to pay upfront, and the poor population cannot afford it. It's also, of course, as in many countries, lengthy and complex. That's also bureaucracy, but also the service disruption that we noted before reduce the expected benefit of connection. So people really say, why I should connect if I don't get enough benefit economically. So they are hesitant to connect unless they are provided with a safe, reliable power. And therefore, we all know that's not only in Africa. There are illegal connection, tampering with the meters, refusing pay bill. This is exacerbated the fact that utility cannot get the cost-effective tariff, and therefore they don't have the means to invest in more in this one. So the next slide is the fundamental question: how to break this vicious cycle. We see financially weak utilities, and on the right you see the reason: non-cost-effective tariff, unprofitable additional household, inability to invest. In the below you see low quality supply, and you see on the left the low uptake and consumption. So this is a circle that has to be broken. Next slide says, well, Madame Laura Cozzi yesterday showed the IEA, the number. I'm also a member of the IEA Working Party on Renewable, and the fact that we need as much, even more, infrastructure, transmission, distribution investment than generation. And that's not very clear. Sometimes people think about renewable, wind, solar, etc., against gas. Now, 50% at least, even more, of the investment should be done in the grids. It's like you build a factory of cars and you don't plan to do roads and freeways. So really, the attention in Africa, particularly, to the infrastructure, grids and transmission is really low. And while on the contrary, the IEA underlined this issue. So we need a lot of investment to maintain, expand, and also plan the new line. Otherwise, the urbanization factor I mentioned before will require absolutely, will be unfit for this purpose. So that's a big challenge in terms of investment. Next slide also
Novotný hor nad Moškochou.
next slide shows also the infrastructure that we need. The infrastructure is been named by Fatih Birol as the backbone of electricity system, and thus the biggest challenge for renewable deployment. Not only transmission, but also interconnection, regional transmission line, mini grids, and battery. Next one. This is also, I'm going to a conclusion. Next one, this one is very interesting. You see in blue, the share of potential private sector participation. In generation, PPA is possible in Africa to do a lot of bid for participation on IPP. In transmission is so limited, it's a monopoly, there's no way. You see the blue is really a fraction, and even in distribution. So we need private sector participation in Africa because we cannot be marginal because they go together, resources, generation, and transmission. So next slide, we launched a publication on the right, private sector participation in African grid development, and we launched also, next slide, the Renew Africa new initiative called Grid for Africa to raise awareness about the importance of the grid infrastructure, support the development of public and private sector. We have this scope, engagement, analysis, grid training course, and the next topics are financing grids, urban and peri-urban areas, and country focus on South Africa and Morocco. So I think I'm almost at the end. Please, next one. Just to say you the next 14th of February, we have been accepted by the Commission to present the Grid for Africa item in this Europe-Africa Business Forum, the news from yesterday. I'm sorry to make it, but I can also show you the invitation list. There are excellent stakeholders from IFC to African ESCOM. So please, Roberto, I will, when I'm finalized, I will send you an invitation that you can pass to all the members of this group in case they want to attend. It's the European Africa Business Forum, just the day before the so-called summit, Europe-Africa. Thank you, Roberto. I hope I was in time. I hope you didn't sleep during my intervention.
No. Difficult to sleep with your interesting and somehow challenging notes, Roberto. Thank you very much for your keynote here. Very good food for thoughts and for the coming discussion as well. And as far as the discussion is concerned, I'm pleased to leave the floor to Claire Falcon. Claire is head of content with VUCA Group and is, may I say that, a long time acquaintance of mine since the days she was in the same capacity with the Clarion Group for Africa, as a matter of fact. She's the most expert in the evolution of energy as a whole in Africa. That's why we asked her to moderate this panel. And Claire, thank you for accepting. And please, you can introduce your panelists, and we are all looking very much forward to the discussion to come. Please.
Thank you, Roberto. As mentioned, we are going to be talking about electricity sector development approaches and examples in Africa. The landscape here in Africa is varied. We have a combination of vertically integrated utilities, some which have gone through partial unbundling and some where complete unbundling has occurred. The predominant challenge for Africa is, of course, the approximately 600 million people, and I repeat that, 600 million people who are without electricity. It's likely too that despite the efforts made pre-COVID, we've actually taken a step backward and have added to the number as people have had to revert to more traditional energy sources as their economic circumstances have changed. Now, all of that being said, this is not a bleak picture. Africa is a continent full of optimism, opportunity, and people who are really keen to improve not only their own lives, but the lives of others. And that is going to be the focus of today's discussion. How do we electrify, finance, and improve Africa's future. So if I could ask my fellow panelists to join me on screen, if I can put it that way. And I'm going to, in the meantime, just introduce our speakers. So we have Kurt Dedekind, who is the planning manager for Eskom Durban. He's also the leader of the CGRAE C6.38 effort to develop a new guide for rural electrification. And he's going to provide a perspective on rural electrification challenges and how they are being addressed, through a distribution system point of view. We also have Mondebala, who is the group executive distribution from Eskom, and he's going to provide a perspective from Eskom in South Africa and how they are addressing long-term strategies for net zero, as well as continuing on the path to providing electricity for all citizens. Claudio Pedretti is the president for the Alliance for Rural Electrification, and he's going to be talking about technology and investment strategies to support electrification initiatives in Africa. And then Gunnar Lorenz is somebody who helps governments, companies and associations in improving their energy policies. He is currently working as an independent consultant, but has worked to support the Moroccan energy policy as a project manager in the Moroccan energy ministry with GIZ. He created and led the Eurelectric E.DSO unit and has approximately 20 years of experience as an energy economist. Now, I believe that Kurt is going to be starting us off with some comments and just with some thoughts in terms of grid planning and electrification. So Kurt, over to you.
Yeah, Claire, thanks very much, and certainly look forward to the session. Firstly, a big thank you for inviting us to the session. It really is a topic that's very close to me, having been part of the electrification journey in South Africa, but also then more recently, obviously, as convener of the CGRAE work groups, and also as secretary of the Africa work group, which is a joint initiative between CGRAE and the World Bank. Notably in terms of fostering, obviously, the whole question of knowledge exchange, obviously pertaining to rural electrification as such. So yeah, if we can move into the slides, please, I think that will be great. Yep, next one, please. And yeah, looking at the picture, I think a picture often is said to tell a million stories as such. And I think Roberto, to a large extent in the introduction, probably shared some of these dynamics with us as well. And I think what we obviously see as far as Africa is concerned is that I think if we look at the north and the south, there's reasonable access to electricity in terms of the North African countries, and then also South Africa lower down. But that the rest of Africa, notably sub-Saharan Africa, and Claire, you mentioned that in your introduction, is that there are probably still 600 million odd people that do not have access to electricity in Africa as such. And I think that remains a massive challenge. But I think what we have seen is that since about 2014, there's been a significant uptake in terms of delivery of connections. And if we look at the transition that has taken place there, we've moved from about 9 million to about 20 million connections pre the COVID pandemic in 2020. So very good progress. And I think what is remarkable, and also is then very important from a sustainability and also a decarbonization perspective, is that approximately 50% of those were either microgrid or renewable energy related connections. So some very, very good investment that is taking place there. I think the other aspect that we see is that there are some countries where there's been some significant and notable improvement in terms of access. And if we look at countries such as Ghana, Ivory Coast, and also Kenya, in recent years, there's been significant access, that has been provided. I think I do take the point that was made by Mr. Vigotti in terms of the whole aspect of usage patterns, however. So it's the question in terms of access, and I'll get to that a bit later on. But I think in terms of translating this into reality so that we have universal access by 2030 as planned, there's a significant investment that's required. And we probably need in the order of between 35 and 50 billion per annum, and that's US dollars, to make sure that this is able to be translated into infrastructure that will service the customers in this area. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, this is an interesting picture that we have here. And I think what Africa needs immediately is the whole question of innovation and some pretty revolutionary solutions if we're wanting to realize that objective of having everybody with electricity access by 2030. I think firstly, if we look at the continent there, the continent is huge. And I think what we can see there is that a number of countries, the likes of the United States, China, India, Japan, and then most of Europe can in fact be backfitted into the continent of Africa as such. And this really means that there are significant challenges that one has in terms of not only having low density areas, but also large distances to travail. And I think, as we know, that unfortunately, long grid expansion and voltage are not very good bedfellows, if I can call it that way. I think the other aspect is that it's a continent with significant environmental challenges, significant climate challenges. We've got the heat in the Sahara. We've got the equatorial areas around Congo and on the equator, and all these really mean that there are some significant challenges that we have as far as dealing with the electrification in these areas are concerned. I think in addition to that, and that was noted earlier on, is that it's a continent with rapid population growth. And of course, the challenge with that is that no sooner do you electrify and you immediately almost have a backlog, which means that the rate of electrification has to, in fact, exceed the population growth as such. The second challenge is obviously the question of urbanization. And I think we note that there's a significant percentage that will move into urban and peri-urban areas. And the advent of megacities in the likes of areas like Lagos, Dar es Salaam, Accra, Johannesburg, for example, will realize by 2050. And when we talk megacities, we're talking about populations in these places with that are greater than 20 million. And then the remaining challenge, obviously, is the whole question of the rural area, which to a large extent remains unelectrified. And then the quest to create the grid, as was mentioned by the previous speaker as well, to ensure that you're able to take the power from the generator to the customer. And that somehow needs to be realized. And I think this is an important point. Now, associated with that, as Claire mentioned as well, is that I think Africa is a continent of opportunity. And to a large extent, we are richly endowed with a number of resources. So certainly from a renewable energy point of view, we have an abundance of certainly solar, in some areas, some very, very good proximity to wind resources. And then obviously also in the equatorial areas, a good access to river flow, so hydro potential is good, and also then in the Rift Valley there is potential for geothermal generation that exists as well. And this obviously can be supplemented by a number of other means as well, biomass, etc. I think the other aspect that is good here is that Africa, to a large extent, because it's unelectrified, provides a reasonably clean canvas for us as engineers to provide adequate and optimal solutions in these areas. So I think that that is a very good point. And as was mentioned by previous speakers as well, is that I think the whole question of leapfrogging and using technology to leapfrog is going to be a very good one that can be utilized. And you know, I think these are some of the elements that make it a good area, on an area with optimistic capability of electrification in the future. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, if we can move to that one, thank you. This is a very interesting slide that was published by the World Bank a couple of years ago, and it really portrays the sub-Saharan perspective in terms of grid, off-grid capability, and then also the adoption of other technologies such as microgrids, mini-grids, etc., to enable electrification in these areas. And I think what we do see is that there's a fairly well-developed transmission infrastructure on the southern side, and that the West African power pool and the East African power pool to a certain extent has a significant transmission grid that is established. So the interconnectors exist. However, access to electricity remains a challenge. And this is really the journey that we need to embark on. And I'd like to make a statement that the availability of technology is not really the challenge in Africa. I think there are many opportunities to use a number of different building blocks, ranging from a nanogrid, a mini grid, the interconnection of these into mesh grids, and then obviously also the capability of merging those into the grid with grid type connections as well. I think all that exists and is available. Additionally, we also know that the various configurations, be they AC, DC, or even hybrid capabilities, that also exists. And there are naturally pros and cons to each of these in terms of adopting these. And I think the other aspect is that, and we're really talking about the distribution system operators, is then the capability to manage this information. It really is a matter of making sure that your metering capability, your capability to have visibility of your generators and your grid, and the controllability of the grid via your energy management systems and also your ADMS, that capability exists. And really, I think all of that translates into a very essential part to say that in order to make sure that there's frugal investment, that we then also look at ensuring that a master plan exists for these areas, so that there's no overlap in terms of technology adoption, which could then lead to differing technologies being applied unnecessarily as such. And it really then goes into this whole question of providing initial access. And initial access should not only be a point of supply for charging the cell phone and perhaps a single light. Initial access should be able to be translated into providing a full access, so that the affordability links up with the living standard measures that are appropriate in that area as well. We need to enable 24/7 access. We need to enable capabilities to ensure that the quality of life improves as well, to make sure that we have access to cooking facilities, that there is proper access to cooling, to heating that may be required in these areas. And that then translates very, very importantly to the whole question of reliability. And I think some of these SAIDI metrics were shared earlier, and their impact in terms of the economies at the end of the day. And I think it is very important that both the reliability and resilience metrics, to a large extent, as was covered in last night in the session with the North American and South American DSOs, that those capabilities are factored in, to really, at the end of the day, create a sustainable solution. And when I talk about sustainability, that sustainability is not only looked at in terms of perhaps the decarbonized future, but that we also create the capacity in the areas, that we have the ops and maintenance capability and the skills requisite to managing the network. That we create the capability of ensuring that we also create infrastructure that enables economic growth, so that a lot of the other vicious cycle elements that were shared are able to be overcome. So in terms of sustainability, it really means that a lot of these elements need to be taken care of. Next slide, please. So the challenges really are converting some of these elements into reality. And I think we did speak about the challenges of financing and making sure that there is a bigger participation by a number of role players, but also to make sure that we create the capability of enabling the planning, the design, and the associated capabilities of managing the systems there as well. And to do so optimally, and to make sure that the right technology is in fact presented. So it is a matter of making sure that the capabilities of communications technologies, the capabilities of mass data management, and the capability of geospatial referencing is all integrated into managing a smart grid capability in these areas. We speak about leapfrogging, and I think this is exactly what we're talking about. And then obviously is the sustainability in terms of making sure that we're able to deploy. Next slide, please. And really, if we look at some of the elements that we've just shared, what are then some of the critical success factors that we need to look at? So the countries that we've mentioned that have been successful in the world, I think if we look at the world, India and Brazil have been notably very successful in creating their electrification infrastructure. In Africa, we've seen Kenya, we've seen Ghana and South Africa, and obviously the North African regions that have translated their rural electrification initiatives into reality. So political will associated with the capability of making sure that the funding and that the requisite regulatory framework is supportive of such a rollout is critically important. And then I think the next element is notable as we move into perhaps the regulated into an unregulated space with respect to differing options being available for the integration of notably generation, microgrid, and other options, that there is a business structure flexibility. And this is really where private public sector participation is crucial. And there are obviously a number of different business models that can be viewed in terms of moving away from the old vertically integrated utility style adoption to a much more flexible business structure that is open to, I think, some of the market based structures and whatever goes with that as well. It does mean obviously that that one requires to invest very heavily into data management, so that these different structures are enabled, and so that the grid is also able to be managed. And obviously, I think core to Africa is the whole question of having tariffs that can be afforded, and that the business models are then also there to make sure that we are able to translate that into a sustainable capability. Really, at the end of the day, I think it is a matter of creating a structure which is going to translate Africa into a powerhouse. And with that, I thank you.
Good, thanks very much. Yeah, you've raised some really important points, and I would like to have the opportunity to pick up on them, but I'm going to suggest that we move on to Monday now, and that all of the questions that are coming in and some of the questions that I have, we sort of address as a bigger panel discussion, because I have a feeling that there's going to be some very interesting input from some of our other panelists. So Monday, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you.
I believe you may be on mute.
Yeah. Monday, sorry, could you just unmute yourself? I think your microphone's not playing ball with us this morning.
It looks like he's unmuted on here. Did you call in via a cell phone?
Okay, we can't hear you. I tell you what, Monday, let's move on to one of the other speakers in the meantime, while we try and get your technical issues sorted out, if you don't mind. Would it be possible for us to bring Claudio up instead? That's Claudio Pedretti, who is the President, Alliance for Rural Electrification. In the meantime. Great. Claudio, I'll hand over to you for the moment.
Hello, Claire. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation, and good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today because I'm a firm believer that the solution towards electrification, especially in Africa, is a mix of distribution grids and off-grid and rural microgrids. So thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and telling you a bit about our association, our sector, and our perspective. I'm the president of Alliance for Rural Electrification, which is the biggest association of the distributed renewable energy off-grid sector. Our members are big corporations, multinational companies, international utilities, SMEs, startups, impact investment funds, financiers in general, as well as NGO and academia. We are now well over 200 members, and we like to call ourselves the driving force towards SDG 7, Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is delivering by 2030 access to energy for all through renewable and sustainable solutions. So basically, we represent all the actors on the off-grid sector. The off-grid sector, in a couple of words, even if most of you know what we are talking about, it's every an off-grid application. It's a sustainable renewable energy plant where the electricity is produced and stored locally, as well as used locally or distributed through a small grid. So most of our application that our members put in place are, as said, microgrid and off-grid CNI. Our members are animating what is now a very vibrant and growing sector. A sector that until only a few years ago had a stigma, right? It was known as a sector where only NGOs, where only donation and concessional finance was allowed to operate. It was known as a sector that was by far to be something attractive for commercial investor in general. And I want to say now that this is no longer the case. The sector is extremely dynamic and things has been changing very fast, very, very fast. Thanks to, first of all, as also Cart mentioned before, thanks to political will. The driving force under our sector is a political will, and the political will is finally there. Another important part of our growth is the technological innovation that are constantly happening through our applied technology. Think about storage. There are many, many new technology that are in development and are implemented in off-grid application, even before they are implemented in other sector. The price in general of solar system, but mostly of storage system, which is a very important part of an off-grid system, are constantly decreasing. So this is making our sector becoming an investable sector, and also a very important solution to deliver energy access for all. So I was reading just yesterday a report from McKinsey that talks about Africa, right? The investability of Africa. And McKinsey is highlighting 10 major sectors of investment in Africa. And all of them are somehow bound with resiliency and climate change. But the first of them is, guess what? It's off-grid scale renewable power system. So they see this sector, the off-grid sector, of one of the most interesting in terms of investment, because of his quick growth and also dynamics. If you think about one of the major application of the off-grid system is microgrids. So it means basically that off-grid solar plants are used to deliver electricity to rural communities and economical activities. Until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we were seeing very small and very limited pipeline, 3, 4, maximum 10 microgrids at the same time. In these days, we see countries where there are rural electrification plants of thousands and thousands of microgrids. I'm talking about Nigeria, for example, Senegal, Togo, Benin. In Nigeria, in the coming years, we will see, and we are already seeing, being installed thousands of microgrid. In Senegal, this is happening today. Togo, Benin is the same. And those are the countries where the political will, local political will, translate into the capability of implementing regulatory framework that is attractive for private investor. And this political will works together with international institutions that are providing subsidies and finance to make this happen and to facilitate this process at his inceptions. So, for example, talking about Nigeria, what happened there is that the World Bank provided the Nigerian state, the Nigerian government, with concessional finance, and together with that, it provided the necessary knowledge that would allow them to put in place effective regulatory framework. That worked perfectly because Nigeria, in only a couple of years, was able to implement the necessary regulatory framework to attract the private capitals. So now you have private companies that are actually feeling comfortable to going into Nigeria. They're feeling rather safe to go there and make a private investment. Together with the same project, they also set up together a unique process where they would deliver concession and so the ability to sell electricity for 25 years together with subsidies, right? So the company, with a very simple effort, they can access to concession and they can access to subsidies. This is making possible to attract private capital. So nowadays we see very, very big effort from the international institution, the European Commission, the US government, all of the DFIs. They have some programs dedicated to access to energy in Africa. And they are going to increase their commitment in the coming year. Together with them, we see those private operator and investor that are starting to playing very seriously. We have in our sector now international utilities that are already undertaking quite ambitious rural electrification program. Of course, this is a new sector, and the view of those operators and actors is a long-term view. It's not a sector for let's say companies and investors that have a short-term view, but the utility that are working there, they are definitely targeting the economical growth that the arrival of electricity is bringing to those remote communities, unlocking the potential of those economies. So they are now securing today the customers that they will have tomorrow. For this reason, many of those operators are putting their attention not only to the sale of electricity, but mostly in the productive use of energy. So you see sometimes microgrid operators, IPPs, independent power producers, that are also now serving other services. So they are acting as utilities. So they are serving e-mobility services, digitalization services, remote payment services, cooling services. And the interesting things is that while the sale of electricity in those areas is still sometimes not profitable, often the sale of all the other services is already rather profitable. For sure, cooling as a services and digitalization services are very, very profitable already. So coming back to that study that I was reading about from McKinsey about Africa, they also were envisioning that this process of electrification of the African continent would be ideally a mix between a public grid and microgrid and off-grid system, where the public grid would eventually cover 60% of the future customer and the off-grid 40%. I think that this idea is already reality, and also the fact that we are here today talking together and exchanging opinion is already a very good start towards this industry cooperation. Thanks for having me.
Dario, thank you very much. We are still doing some work trying to get Monde's connection sorted out, but I think that we are almost there. Monde, I don't know if you are back online with us. And Claudio, thank you. As I said, we are going to be asking you some questions a little bit later when we have a bigger discussion with everybody. You've also raised some issues that I would like to explore a little bit further, particularly the issue of productive use of energy. And I think that that's something that Kurt may be able to add to as well. So yeah, please don't go anywhere.
Thank you.
Monde, are you here with us?
I am here. Just please indicate if you can hear me now.
Perfect. It's good to
Great.
hear your voice.
Yeah. No, my apologies about that. It was the settings on my computer. I apologize, colleagues. Yeah, thanks, Claire, for this opportunity. And it's just after afternoon in South Africa. Good afternoon to the rest of the colleagues. Yeah, I think from my side, I'm going to take you through what Eskom distribution is currently doing, specifically looking at the future, what strategies are we putting in place, how the industry itself is evolving, and basically how the country is preparing itself for this major transition. If you can move to the next slide. So Eskom as an entity, it is one of the remaining, if not the only remaining vertically integrated utility in the world. As we might know, that the government has made certain pronouncements regarding how Eskom is structured. In that we are in the process of basically breaking down Eskom into the 3 different entities. That would be generation, distribution, and transmission as standalone entities, but still under the Eskom holdings, but operating independent of each other. That is really the roadmap as the government has pronounced. So effectively, part of that is how we transition from being a fossil fuel, mainly coal-reliant generating entity, to embracing more renewables, having a bigger footprint, specifically of wind and solar to the grid. If we can move to the next slide. So this slide just indicates that as a country, in terms of the integrated resource plan, how we intend as a country to reduce our reliance on coal, and how really the solar and wind will play a bigger role in terms of our generating landscape. So from a distribution point of view, our strategy is aligned to the integrated resource plan. We are basically looking at building a more sort of flexible building flexibility into how we manage the grid. We are in the process of we have approved a project to build the first distribution system operator in the country and in sub-Saharan Africa. So effectively, we are now looking at how do we create a platform for all the IPPs that are going to come on board to realize the picture on the right, and how they will take part in the sort of evolving electricity distribution landscape. So as Eskom, we have embraced the just energy transition journey, and we are basically on that roadmap to ensure that we get to a zero carbon net emission. If we can move to the next slide. So yeah, this is just to give a brief overview of the Eskom just energy transition landscape. In the short term, we are looking at the ESCOM turnaround. In the long term, we're looking at a transition to utility. But to take us through that, we need to go through a just transition, because the country itself is heavily reliant on coal, and a lot is at stake when it comes to the whole coal value chain. So in transitioning from a coal reliant to a more renewable sort of energy landscape, we need to make sure that we do so in a manner that is that guarantees people's jobs and livelihoods, that they're not severely impacted. Next slide, please. So the distribution landscape itself, we've basically pivoted around three main pillars. One, looking at the country as a whole, as South Africa Inc., whereby we facilitated an open grid mainly to stimulate economic growth through a reliable and an affordable energy availability. From an industry point of view, we are looking at unlocking some of the issues that, because currently our infrastructure is aging and is aged. So we need to make sure that as we transition, we sort of look after what we have whilst we're building onto the existing infrastructure. From an ESCOM point of view, we do take note that as people embrace more renewable technologies, that the impact of that on our sales, there will be sort of a negative impact. But we're also looking at how do we then sort of cushion that by embracing more on the renewable space. So in that, we're looking at microgrids. We're looking at a small scale embedded generation. We're looking at dispersed energy resources, and by doing so, it then actually put us in a position where having a E.DSO actually made sense, to make sure that all of these things are integrated, to make sure that all of these actually can be connected onto the grid. If we can move, please, the next slide. So we are looking at a win-win solution, whereby we've got the needs on the one end, and we've got our products and services looking at, because our customers are now customers and consumers are actually evolving to be actually prosumers. So we're saying, how do we create a win-win situation between us, the utility, and our prosumers? And in doing that, we've got local objectives, we've got regional objectives, and we've got also a national objective. So in our view, this is where the E.DSO will actually play a pivotal role in ensuring that we facilitate this relationship. The next slide. So effectively, in terms of the three main objectives from a distribution point of view, one, we're looking at demand management. Secondly, we're looking at how do we integrate with our generators from a supply management point of view. And I think we've had also with other speakers talking about other services that then become available by having a E.DSO. So we're looking at those supporting initiatives. Again, the issue of ensuring that we manage that balance between, on the one side, on the supply side, and also on the demand side. So effectively, having a E.DSO will unlock a lot of opportunities, whether it's at a local, whether it's at a regional, or whether it's a national level. Okay, next slide. So in conclusion, what are we looking at as ESCOM distribution? Having the just energy transition as at the center of the things that we do. We take note that as distributors and resellers will lose volume through the penetration of local IPPs and renewable energy, but we take note that there are opportunities that exist to ourselves, to prosumers, and to the rest of the industry. Having a smart grid that is modernized, it will actually unlock a lot of value within the value chain. Having our distributed embedded energy resources will actually push for the need for a DSO, and that the DSO will be at the center of facilitating these transactions. We do know that the government has pronounced on the license cap requirement, in that you can actually now, without the need for a license, you can generate either for self-consumption or to sell onto the energy market up to 100 megawatts without the requirement of a license. We've also got the small-scale embedded generation with people installing their own rooftop and their own PVs on their properties. So we're seeing these as opportunities for the DSO. And we do have a tariff that talk to these small-scale generators, and that somehow we will need to find a win-win approach. So the DSO, in our minds, it will play a system operator role, and but also with the capability of aggregation and also a trading capability point of view. But all of this will be enabled by a policy framework that will basically assist us in this evolving industry. But to do that, we firstly need to the regulator to be on board, and the government policy to support us. Claire, thank you very much. That is in the 10 minutes that I've been given. I hope I've done justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is great. As I've said previously, there are questions that are coming through, and I'd like to just hold all of them aside so that we can discuss them all at once. If I could also ask you just to check your chat. I've put 2 questions to you that I think might help with the conversation, but I just want to get some feedback from you before we do that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd also just like to remind you, this really is the opportunity to ask questions of our experts that you may not have insight into, or ask them stuff that perhaps we haven't discussed here today, but that you feel might be within their wheelhouse given their positions. This really is not meant to just be a conversation between us, so we really do encourage you to participate. And if I could also just remind you, if you are not speaking, could you please just make sure that your microphone is on mute? I know that it's sometimes difficult to do so, but it does just help not distract our speakers. And having said all of that, I am very pleased to introduce Gunnar, who is going to be our last speaker for this morning. And as I mentioned, he is an independent consultant and an energy economist. And Gunnar, I'm going to pass the stage over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Claire, for this very kind introduction. And thank you very much, Roberto and E.DSO for Smart Grids for the very nice invitation for the event Global E.DSO. I think, as Claire already mentioned, I mean, I've been in the DSO scene in Brussels. I started 15 years ago by creating the DSO unit in Eurelectric, and it's for me very exciting to see that today we are, or you are creating the DSO entity, which is, I think, a major step for DSOs in Europe to make the voice heard. However, of course, the last years I spent in Morocco, and where I used to work in the Moroccan energy ministry. And so you see the title of my presentation today is "Big is Beautiful." first I was thinking about calling it Go Big or Go Home, but then I thought, no, Moroccans, they wouldn't send you home. They would at least invite you for a minty before you leave. So I think Moroccans are far too friendly. So big is beautiful is the idea for renewables, or as a headline for renewables in Morocco. And I'd like to structure my presentation in 4 building blocks, starting with the framework, the strategy of Morocco towards renewables. The second one will be then about what kind of investments are we seeing in renewables. Maybe they're a little bit bigger than in other countries, maybe. Then there's challenges for DSOs and especially the business model. And last but not least, as we have a global event today, what is the ambition of Morocco towards, outside the borders of the country? So these are the 4 building blocks, and let's just jump right into the first one, please. Thank you. So there are very ambitious renewable plans for 2030 in Morocco. They want to have at least half of the installed capacity of electricity being renewable. That means 52% by 2030. So this sounds, of course, very ambitious. What about the potential? So as everybody guesses, there's a lot of sun in Morocco. So for the solar, it's already quite interesting. But maybe what some people are not aware of is that it's also quite windy. So we have very good conditions on the mountains, on the Atlas, but even also on the flat land with the wind coming from the Atlantic coast. And some experts even said that there's no need to go offshore in the Atlantic Ocean because the onshore availability of wind is so good that this would be fine. So this is the target for 2030. It's 52%. Where are we today? So we have today 37%, and that's a little bit short of the 2020 target of 42%. So there's still a lot to do, obviously. So that was for the capacity. How does it look for the production? You can see on the right-hand side, you can see a big brown field, which is actually coal. So we have 2/3 of the production, which is coal, and we have roughly 20% renewables. And there we have wind leading with 11%, and photovoltaic has 1% at the moment. Thermal solar has 3%, which is quite interesting, and hydro, which has been traditional renewable, has about 3%. Let's jump now into the investments. So how does it look like? The next slide. You can see here that the investments in large installations play a big role. And the first picture you see when you talk about renewables in Morocco is, of course, CSP, concentrated solar power. You can see here the 2 upper photos, which are parabolic true technology, where you heat a liquid in tubes, and then you can generate electricity there. So there are 2 installations. And then you have a third one, which you see below from a picture taken from the plane. From the air, you see a huge field with parabolic mirrors, and they can all direct the sunbeams into a tower that's in the middle, and then it's again the same principle. So what's been why has Morocco decided to go into this CSP? It's because there's one big advantage, and that is the molten salt storage. So when there was a decision to go for CSP, the battery technology, the other storing technology, hasn't been so much developed. So this is why CSP was seen as the right way to go. And it's very impressive if you have ever the chance to go there. It's a huge complex, and it's in total about 500 megawatts of installed capacity. How is this possible? How is it done? Is there a special way in Morocco? Yes, there's Mazen. Mazen is an important player. It's a one-stop rest shop agency, you can say, and they are attracting really financial or foreign investments. and they are also facilitating the tenders. So you have to see Mazen as, first of all, identifying the sites and also analyzing the sites, getting permissions, then thinking about the tender, how this is how this could be structured, negotiating with ONE, with a single buyer, and then structuring, of course, the financials with international donors. So you have all the major international cooperation banks that have donated money or that have invested there. Let's say KfW, World Bank, EIB, and so on and so on. So they are really queuing up for investments in Morocco. And of course, one of the reasons is also the sovereign guarantee that there is. Besides all these Mazen projects, there are also independent projects. I mean, I should say that independent power producers have quite a history in Morocco, also for conventional power plants. And however, they are also very big. So let's say 50 megawatts and 100 and so on. So it's quite a lot of things. So that's for the big ones. For the small projects, there are some obstacles to overcome. So because they are at the moment the feed-in rules for the feed-in tariffs, also the transport tariffs, they are still being developed. So they already started doing that, but there are still some issues to be solved. So this is still ongoing. However, I can also report that just recently there's a new network code that was published, so that gives a bit more transparency to developers that just want to do it on their own. How does it look now for DSOs? Going to the next slide. As you can imagine, there's not a lot of distributed renewables. You don't really see a lot of rooftop installations on PV basis, and maybe it's even, I mean, some of the DSOs, or many of the DSOs, when we talk to them, they are quite skeptical about renewables, distributed renewables. And one of the reasons, or maybe the main reason, is because they see their business model threatened by distributed renewables. And the reason is because they are paid by the kilowatt hour. So the tariffs are fixed by the government. They are based on volume. So yeah, as I said, kilowatt hours. And the less customers would consume, or even if they would feed in illegally, of course, at the moment, feed in electricity, the less the profits. So you can really see that the revenue has to stay. I mean, for the business to survive, the revenues have to stay at a certain level, not only to finance, obviously, the operation of the grid, but also to cross-subsidize water, because all the distribution companies also are operating the water distribution. So what could be done here is, and I remember that this discussion is very, I think we used to be very similar in Europe, like 10 years ago when we published some paper on that, is that the connection fee, there should be introduction of connection fees based on capacity, just to give value to the grid, because just on the volume is not, for a grid operator, obviously it's not a good thing, because most of the costs are fixed, and that would improve the situation. Also, you can think about incentives to connect distributed renewables. So I discussed it a lot with actors in Morocco. However, one argument against that was the social dimension, because at the moment we have progressive volumes. I mean, progressive tariffs. That means the more you consume, the more you pay per kilowatt hour. And so you have, I mean, the reason behind that is because the assumption is that people who are poor use less electricity. People who are rich can afford higher bills. And obviously, if you mingle a little bit with the tariff structure, this social dimension would be somehow lost. So, but I'm pretty sure there are some ways around it. It just takes a little bit of discussion, takes a little bit of effort, and I believe there could be a solution. And one of the things here should be mentioned, that one entity that could play a big role is the independent regulator, UNRE. The president was actually already nominated by the King Mohammed VI in 2018. However, the operation only started last year because there was also the nomination process for a council. The president, Abdelatif Badash, is very active. He used to work for ONE, so for the state electricity company, so he's very well aware. And one of the priorities is to get the state national electricity company unbundled, at least starting with accounting. So that would be transmission and generation to get this separated. And you can see on the right-hand side also the very nice logo that we supported UNRE to create this logo and some communication issues there. So we can expect a lot from the regulator. I can say, I mean, my impression is that the DSOs or the DSO issue is maybe not the top of his priority. I think at the moment they are starting to get some data to understand better the situation of DSOs. And I think down the road, I think there will be more to come. And I believe because obviously 2030 is just one milestone. I mean, they already Morocco is already thinking about 2035 with even more ambitious renewable goals that do not only concern electricity, but that will also concern the energy consumption as a whole. And when you started looking at this, obviously you have to look at transport. When you look at transport, you might think about electrification of transport, and then, I mean, that would be something where distributors would have to play a role, because if you want to fuel, I mean, if you want to charge electric vehicles, that's for sure. And also, I think the potential for rooftop photovoltaic, I think, should be still explored. So I think there will be some more involvement on DSOs for sure, and let's just see how this will develop. So that was a little bit the internal view of Morocco, and maybe now let's cross a little bit the borders with the next slide. And Morocco is orientating itself here not only to the north, so not only to Europe, but also to the south. And I will explain that in a minute. Let's go first to the north. So what's happening there? What's existing? These are lines to Spain. I mean, Morocco used to import electricity from Spain. However, recently, like around 2018, that was a little bit shifting in the other direction. So suddenly, Morocco was also exporting to Spain, as ONE, the national electricity company, is trading on the UMI, on the Spanish Electricity Exchange. And so the Moroccans, I mean, the Spanish were a little bit surprised to see the electricity coming from Morocco, and Morocco said, yes, we are investing in renewables, this is all fine. The Spanish said, wait a minute, are you sure this is renewables? We just recently opened up a coal power plant in 2018, and you didn't really buy a CO2 certificate. So is it really fair that you are exporting to Spain? And there was a discussion where also the European Commissioner for Energy was involved. And so yeah, so it's something that is quite interesting. So it's something that maybe in the future will be more interesting, but for the moment is, yeah, I think Morocco still has to develop renewables. I can say that extension of the line to Spain is under discussion, and also a line to Portugal is being studied. Going further to the future, some of you might remember the Desertec idea, an idea or an association that is still alive, a little bit different focus today. But that was an initiative that was created in Europe to import electricity, to import energy from Morocco. Today this is something that is that is driven by Morocco actually. And especially Mazen is very interested in getting a plan for sustainable electricity trading with Europe, the so-called SET plan. And they have already signed a memorandum of understanding. And we can also say that there has been an intention to have a cooperation with the EU, Morocco EU, and that was just published, this intention, before the Glasgow COP. So that's a little bit electricity to the north. It is important to note that Mazen and ONE are very keen on south-to-south cooperation. Mazen, for example, for this kind of system or this kind of concept that I just explained before, and ONE for, let's say, technical issues, for example, electrification. We saw in the first presentation, we saw that electrification is quite high in Morocco, and I think ONE would be happy to export their knowledge and their skills to Africa, in particular, of course, to French-speaking countries. Last not least, a very hot topic is the green hydrogen. There's recently, last year, there has been a strategy published, and Morocco thinks that they could provide up to 4% of the global demand for green molecules. And that would not only be hydrogen, this could be also ammonia. And ammonia, green ammonia, is something that is for Morocco especially interesting because it's used for fertilizers. And what else do you need for fertilizers? Phosphor. And who is one of the biggest phosphor producers? Morocco. So that would be a very nice synergy, of course, where also the Moroccan industry is being involved here. So that's a little bit my take on my view on the Moroccan renewables and the DSOs. And I'm not sure this will be. I mean, Morocco is very ambitious, and I'm not sure that Morocco is how Morocco is ranking among Africa. But one thing I can say for sure, I think of the countries that are represented here today, I think Morocco is the only one that is now in the quarterfinal of the Africa Football Cup. So going to play against Egypt on Sunday. So at least for the football fans in Morocco, they are quite happy about the performance. And yeah, I would like to finish here, and looking forward for all your questions and for the discussion. Thank you very much.
You know, you were doing so well, and then you had to bring up the football. Really? I don't know. I think you may have lost half of the audience as a result of that.
What about South Africa? I don't know. I mean, I didn't really see you performing very well at the Africa Cup, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think our football team is a little bit schizophrenic. It's never quite sure what it's supposed to be doing. If I may ask that the rest of our panelists join us on screen so that we can actually get into the really interesting part of the discussion here. And I would like to, of course, also say thank you to everybody for your participation so far. Thank you as well to Roberto and the team for inviting us to participate. I'm looking forward to seeing how we can unpack some of the issues that are specific to Africa. One of the questions that I would like to ask before we get going with parts of the discussion. Monde, do you think that you could perhaps just give a bit of an overview to the audience about the unique situation as far as South African distribution and the distribution sector is concerned, and our relationship with municipalities? Because I don't know in fact, I'm not sure of any cases where that same relationship is in place. And I think it might help just explain some of the challenges that the distribution system faces at the moment as far as unbundling and expansion and investment. So can I ask you to just do that as a segue to the discussion?
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I think the South African distribution industry is an interesting case in that we have our regulator, NERSA, who assigns operating licenses and distribution licenses to different entities, distributors in this case. So we have the national distributor called ESCOM Distribution, and then we also have the local distributors within the municipalities. So what has happened is that in terms of our constitution, the municipalities, they have got the constitutional obligation to provide basic services, of which electricity is one. So this is largely, this is in the main challenge in more urbanized areas where the municipalities are fairly well set up. And so what you will find is that in the more urbanized areas, you've got strong municipalities. We do have metros, which Johannesburg is one, Pretoria is another one, Cape Town is another one. And then you've got some of the smaller municipalities. So outside of the main metros and large urban areas, you then have a significant customer base, of which then ESCOM distribution then plays a bigger role. So what is happening now with the advent of urbanization and just the movement of people, you get large parts of areas being urbanized that were traditionally falling under the ESCOM license areas. A license area now, yeah, needless to say, this creates some level of competition between the national distributor and the municipalities themselves, who are obviously looking at increasing their customer base and also with that their revenue. So now with the evolution of as we transition now, and now the government has made certain pronouncements regarding with regards specifically to municipalities, in that they can procure electricity from other independent power producers, and they do not necessarily have to procure from ESCOM. So this then creates an opportunity for municipalities then to get into some PPAs with other entities for the generation of their own electricity. This will literally create a situation whereby a municipality can actually be self-sustainable and keeping the national grid as a backup. So, but to get there, it's quite a minefield, because now it seems like we are actually fighting for customers, which then makes the situation quite interesting. The distribution industry in the country will have to change, because I think we've got quite a number of over 200 tariffs within the country, so that we have to transform this industry. Once that transformation has taken place, only then we can see some level of rationalization, because what you find that you've got people on the one side of the street paying a different tariffs to people on the other side of the street, experiencing a completely different sort of levels of service. So Claire, I hope I've sketched a bit of a picture, and yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything further to follow-ups. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think also the fact that built into the operating expenses or the operating of our municipal system is the fact that a lot of, well, there is a portion of our population that is considered indigent, and so get free electricity, which is, you know, funded through various mechanisms. But then there's also the element of where utilities or municipalities are cross-subsidizing other services with electricity tariffs. So it's a little bit like trying to unravel a ball of wool at the moment. Kurt, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to just add, just to kind of, I guess, give some insight into the unique situation that the South African sort of municipal landscape is.
Yeah, Claire, perhaps a challenging element, but I think many of the issues that Wanda has raised are very, very pertinent. I think it is a lot to do with the various perhaps offerings of service and service levels that complicate matters. I think the other factor is really the massive urbanization, and it's a trend not only in South Africa, but a trend that's happening, you know, in Africa as well. that we're seeing this massive urbanization happening, and of course that creates the conflict in terms of challenging all services, not only electricity, but also other services that also come to the fore. So it challenges elements in terms of affordability. It challenges, the whole question of managing these services. It challenges issues such as high theft levels. And I think a lot of the issues that Roberto mentioned earlier on are really then the microcosm of this relationship that gets formed in terms of providing an acceptable service and not only access, which in many cases is also illegal. So that in turn then creates public safety measures. It creates other factors that also need to be managed. So there's not only the regulatory space that needs to be addressed, but also then the statutory space that needs to be addressed in such circumstances. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a lot of work that is being done in terms of addressing some of these challenges, and I'd be curious. I'm obviously interested to see how this is going to be working itself out. You mentioned, Kurt, and I would like to perhaps just get some feedback from everybody on this. Mr. Vigotti mentioned that there is a vicious cycle that needs to be broken when it comes to electricity access. And I'd like to ask if any of you have any comments that you'd like to make with regards to this specifically before we move on to the rest of the discussion. Anybody have any comments about that, Kurt?
Yeah, Claire, I think it is probably one of the key elements in terms of providing the means to the journey to the end in terms of universal access. And I think the whole question of affordability really needs to be addressed, because it really provides this, call it almost a missing link in terms of creating a link between not only providing electricity, but also meeting the aspirational needs of, I think, the communities. I think if we talk about aspiration, we talk about people wanting to migrate into an improved living standard measure, and being able to afford perhaps some of the luxuries that go with electricity, the availability of capabilities such as cooking, for example, or heating, or just cooling in some countries. So, I think those are perhaps the benefits that need to be realized. And that is why I think the importance of not only looking at access, but looking at access to creating an economy that is supportive of the growth in the country is so important. And I think it is very important that those two legs are managed together, because so often we throw money at the solution, and that doesn't solve matters. So I can create infrastructure, but it doesn't create that sustainable capability of earning a living and making sure that I can then grow from that capability. So it's very important that we have a holistic perspective when we look at addressing the whole question of electrification in countries. So that we take people along with us, and that we are able to address that aspirational level that I think people have. I think if we look at the Maslow theory, inherently people want to improve. People want to better themselves. And I think that's the journey that we need to take people along with as well. Thanks.
I completely agree. And of course, that does bring, Claudio, us back to that whole concept of productive use of energy, because as we discussed earlier, just because you have electricity doesn't necessarily mean that you are aware of how best to use it, how it can improve your life beyond the obvious light and maybe cooking. And I wondered, I know you touched on it briefly when you spoke in the beginning, but I was wondering if you could expand on that. And Kurt, I know that we've spoken about this as well, and why productive use of energy is so incredibly important. Claudio, let me start with you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for the question. And here I wish to also to echo Kurt when he highlighted the fact that one thing is serving activities that are producing a sustainable economy, and another thing is serving the will of the people that are hoping to do something in their lives with electricity that arrives. While we address access to energy in rural communities, right, underdeveloped community, in my opinion, the priorities is serving whatever services are needed to activate the economy. So first of all, we need to make sure that local entrepreneurs, local activities are able to get the electricity as an instrument, as an activator of economical development. That is the first one step. That's where electricity is truly the first one step out of poverty. And that's the first point and priority that I think rural electrification program needs to serve, because also that is the only way to profitability, right? If you want to attract private actors in this space, so having the hope of serving the 600 million of rural people that are needed to be served, you need to have private actors, and the way to have it is serving them and make sure that they have at least some profitability. So this said, it's something that this is already happening, because the market, our sector is taking already this direction by itself, right? We have seen many in the past, many communities electrified with grants, with money, without any design or hope based on economical profitability. And most of those projects has failed, right? But what is already happening, and the topic that you mentioned, Claire, productive use of energy, is exactly what is making access to energy now an interesting sector also for private investor. So on one side, you have the developer, the mini-grid developers that are receiving some help in terms of subsidies in order to put down those very expensive assets in those remote areas. So this somehow the risk their investment. And on the other hand, you have other players that are not necessarily the mini-grid developer, but they are working on the productive use side. So you have, for example, in communities in the Lake Victoria, in fishing community, where you have vibrant economies that are living on fishery, right? The arrival of electricity makes a huge difference. So if you bring a storage solution, you literally change the life of those people in few months and the economies of these places. So you have those companies that are selling cooling as a service, right? They invest in cooling facility and they sell cooling spaces. This is what we call productive use, and they are on one side helping the community and the local entrepreneurs to make money for a living, or even grow fast. On the other hand, they are creating very good off-takers for the mini-grid developers, because they have now businesses that can purchase electricity, perhaps at a higher price, in exchange of more availability, more reliability of their power. But cooling is only one example, and we see many others of those services that are serving the community, developing the economy, but also working as very good customers for the mini-grid developers. Telecom is only one of those. There are countries where the cell network is still expanding. Mozambique, for example, is one of those, and they still need to cover many areas of the countries. And the way how they do it, they are no longer using expensive diesel generators in terms of OPEX, but they are using off-grid technologies, right? And those off-grid technologies, while they serve the BTS towers, they serve as well the population and other services. So this is what we call an holistic approach that is becoming natural because it follows simply standard business rules. So it's on one side is very important to help those entrepreneurs that are working on those productive use of energy, and again, on the other hand, it's very important that all the stakeholders that are involved really speak together and come together into regulation and regulatory frameworks that are delivering the right needs of the actors of this process.
Thanks very much. Kurt, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this discussion at this point?
I think that was covered fairly comprehensively, and I think echo some of the statements that I made. You know, I just go back to our own journey from an electrification point of view, and fundamental to that was not only to provide access, but also to support local communities in terms of projects as were mentioned, for example, with the fishing in Lake Victoria. And I remember very distinctly, you know, assisting with the establishment of small welding shops, etc., that could then assist the local communities in terms of building their own infrastructure, and that is obviously creating that sense of sustainability. But also that one then also links in with the whole concept of providing goods and services, and at one stage, and that's no longer the case, but we did provide a range of white goods to our customers, and I think in an endeavor obviously to make sure that people used electricity, but also that this transition in terms of access was internalized, so that the full capability of energy access was able to be realized. So you know, I think that is the whole concept of, as we saw in those figures that Roberto showed earlier on, is it's no use having 100% access, but in fact your sales per customer are less than 20 units per month, for example, because that really indicates that you're really using it for perhaps a single light and maybe charging a cell phone only, and not really benefiting the community at large in terms of achieving what I think the intent of universal access is. Thanks.
I mean, you see that, of course, even at the moment in you know, utilities in the States, for instance, where the utility is still offering to supply certain types of white goods or thermostats or, you know, whatever it is to consumers at either specialized prices, or just that will help them meet some of their energy efficiency requirements, but also keep people, you know, expanding their electricity use. And I think that it's a very good opportunity for African utilities to start encouraging people to use electricity, maybe through some sort of subsidized white good offering or a utility store or something like that.
Now, perhaps just a comment, sorry, Claire, just to add on to that, is that I think it is very important that the whole question of affordability is looked at.
Yes.
And together with that the whole transition towards a decarbonized future is also looked at. And really, the question is that the fuel cost at the end of the day should be similar. So whatever that transition is and how that transition is managed, I think it is important that those kind of factors are just looked at in terms of how these elements are then managed and rolled out. Thanks.
Maybe Claire, could I just give a comment, because I found it very interesting what you just said about the white goods and let's say utilities engaging in these kind of services. And I think I have to remember when we introduced competition in Europe in the European electricity. And I think one of the ideas when competition is introduced for a product which is, let's say, exchangeable, because electricity is just kilowatt hours, so you just choose the cheapest one. I think this kind of services to provide to customers is a very interesting tool to, let's say, to build a relationship, and also maybe to be able to charge higher prices for this, because in the end the customer is not using kilowatt hours, he wants to have light, he wants to have cold, he wants to have heat or whatever, or he wants to run his computer or something. So I think this concept is very, very interesting. However, when this was when companies, utility companies, were trying to introduce this, they couldn't really, let's say, change the culture, because there were a lot of people who were only thinking about kilowatt hours, who were thinking about this kind of technology, who didn't really think about services. And I think this cultural change for utilities and also for DSOs in particular, to, let's say, to get this through, I think this takes time. And I've seen a few utilities in Europe having huge difficulties to implement this. So I think the idea is great. However, it will take some, let's say, some effort to change the culture for utilities.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, cultural change is difficult even in the best of circumstances. And I don't think that, you know, coming out of into a post-COVID world, if I can put it that way, and I use that term very lightly, that we could consider this the best of circumstances. But, you know, I think that in Africa in particular, people who don't have electricity are incredibly hungry for the benefits that it will bring. I've told this story before, but I remember meeting a woman who had won an award that was being offered, that was being presented by Citibank, and it was for small scale entrepreneurs. And I think the amount that she won was about 20,000 Rand. And I asked her what she was going to do with that money, and she was so excited to have won because that money was going to get her piped water to her home. And that meant the difference between her spending 3 hours a day walking to and from the water source, and it meant that she had the opportunity to grow her business. And I think if we can encourage people to start thinking like that, and especially, you know, people who've never had electricity they don't know what they don't know. So if we can already start encouraging them to be thinking bigger, hopefully, you know, we have to have a glass almost full approach here, because otherwise, yeah, it's not necessarily going to be working out very well. Speaking of glasses half full, I wanted to bring in the whole concept of technology, mini grids, storage, how all of this is changing the African landscape. As Claudio mentioned, and in your presentation, Kurt, you highlighted that I think it's 53% of all electrification in Africa is currently or is going to be driven by mini and off-grid solutions. And so I know that there was a bit of a conversation going on the side with regards to the role of storage. So I wanted to put that sort of question out to you as our panelists. How is storage going to change this landscape? Monde, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add to this. I mean, storage obviously is going to have a very different meaning for you than it might necessarily for off-grid or mini-grid applications. But I mean, would you like to make some sort of comment about that anyway?
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I think from my perspective, storage is going to play a key role in how we move and how we develop and how we consume electricity. So as part of our future landscape, storage is a significant part of that. We are currently running a project to install battery storage in certain parts of our, as a phase one. Obviously, there is a phase two that's coming up, but we see that playing more and more bigger role because with storage, then it allows us to move from being non-dispatchable, electricity being non-dispatchable to dispatchable, being available on demand. So as we grow in the space, storage will definitely form a significant part of the technology applications that we're utilizing. So yes, I think the cost is still a factor now, but we do believe that over time that will also sort itself out as it becomes more and more formidable. It will basically have a bigger and bigger use, even on our existing sort of infrastructure and networks. Because what we're seeing is that as more and more people put rooftop PVs on their properties, we can then use storage to basically take advantage of those installations. So yeah, I think we see storage playing a significant role going forward. Thanks, Claire.
Claudio, your perspective obviously is slightly different from grid connection. I don't know if you would like to just share some thoughts about what storage is going to mean for the mini grid industry, especially as it becomes more efficient and less costly.
Indeed, Claire. Actually, if I have to point out one of the technology that is making and has made our sector grow, that is storage technology, right? We are here talking about off-grid system, about towns, communities, factories powered by off-grid power system because of the very fast evolution of storage technology. Otherwise, we won't be here speaking. And by the way, those technologies, when they come to industrialization, are the same, that they can then be applied for grid stability. As they are used and industrialized, then they scale up and they are used for grid stability. So it's we are somehow on the same field in this sense. And the sector is becoming more and more interesting. We have, for example, a lot of companies as our members, and in general in our sector, that are already not developing, but already implementing and rolling out new technologies in the off-grid sector. And I'm talking about, for example, ultracapacitors, thermal storage. Those are technologies that are not that known, but you have to know that ultracapacitors are already working and are already in the field in Africa as a sustainable and very reliable off-grid storage solution, right? And there is a lot of companies that are studying new ways how to industrialize those technologies. Redox batteries, right? They are relatively new. They maybe have, this technology has maybe 20 years, and this technology has a stigma of not being reliable. But there are at least 10 companies that are patenting new ways how to implementing, and also this is going to be rolled out. This will bring much lower prices, much more sustainability in general to the storage system. Maybe it's not definitely the case of vanadium redox flow, but redox flow is much more. You have also very sustainable electrolytes with that technology as well, and definitely much more sustainable than lithium. thermal storage. So this is definitely a very interesting space to be looking at, also from an investment point of view. So this company are investable company. They are most of the time based in Western country, in the US or in Europe, but their projects are being implemented also in developing countries. And it will be thanks to those technology that in the near future, hopefully, rural electrification will be more and more bankable and investable.
Thank you very much. If I could just ask Claire from E.DSO, if you could just give me a time check, please. I know that there is one last speaker and I don't want to overrun, but I did want to, if I can, just bring up the whole concept of investability, which Claudio mentioned now, and that is there is sometimes a perception that Africa is a risky investment. Claudio, you and Gunnar both are from Europe. You are actively putting money into Europe. I mean, sorry, into Africa. Monde, you and Kurt are obviously based here on the continent. You have a very different perspective as well. So can we just talk about Africa and investability? And Gunnar, let's start with you, given that you are the economist in the room, and we can then move on from there. So, yeah.
Yes, definitely. I would like, I think, as you've seen from the presentation, I mean, in Morocco, donors are queuing up. So you really have to even, let's say, compete sometimes to invest money or to donate money. And the big reason for that, I think, or one reason is for sure Mazen, who's really facilitating this, and then the guarantee by the sovereign. So yeah, banks really like this kind of concept, and I think maybe in different countries it's maybe a different situation. And another point is a clear strategy. So and Morocco has this clear target. So it's all backed by the king. And even though governments are changing, there are always elections and so on and so on. The king stays, of course, and he makes sure that there's a certain continuity. And that makes Morocco very interesting. I'd like to draw maybe the comparison to Tunisia, because also Roberto has asked me to do so. And I was last year, I was there on a mission, and I was able to talk to some high-level decision makers. And what I understood is that the strategy in Tunisia is not so clear like it is in Morocco. And at the moment they have, like, I think, just to give you an idea, they have 4%, I think, renewable production in the electricity, which is yeah, significantly less than Morocco. And the projects are a bit smaller, so you have more, let's say, more small-scale industrial producers. What I understand is also that connection studies are difficult to achieve. So the utility is maybe a little bit more stiff, maybe a bit less flexible there. So there are, and also another issue is the market. So in Morocco we have right now we have a regulator which is truly independent. In Tunisia we're still waiting for that. There are some studies going on. And maybe, well, it's planned to have a regulator. However, for the moment, I can still see a kind of standstill at the moment because we have a new government. And apparently, also what I heard is that every few months you have a new energy minister, and the ministry is, let's say, always, let's say, moving from one ministry to the other, the energy subject. So that's not really giving a lot of confidence, let's say, to investors there. So this is just giving you a little bit of a viewpoint from the north of Africa. I think it's all about stability. I think when you have a stable strategy, when you have a stable history also of paying your debts and all of this, when you have a market that maybe is even facilitated. Maybe you have a PPA, power purchase agreement, which gives you certain security. I think these are all factors, and if these are in place, I think it's obviously it's a growing market. It's a growing population. I mean, we have heard a lot of arguments why you should invest in this country, and in this continent, in these countries in the continent. So I think it's absolutely possible.
It's interesting that you should talk about things like PPAs and proven histories. You know, I remember, and I really am giving my age away here, but I remember having a conversation with Kenyan colleagues when they were discussing the best way to start putting frameworks in for PPAs. And was it a case of, do you have a template? Do you negotiate it as it happens? And, you know, if I look at where we were then, maybe 10 years ago, and where we are now, negotiating PPAs for a lot of countries in Africa have become a way of business. They are not mysterious, they're not scary. So that ability to learn and adapt is definitely, you know, being embraced. I think it's maybe we just need to be speeding it up a little bit. There's a lot of talk, but it would be nice to see some more action. So, Monde, perhaps you would like to give some thoughts about investment into Africa. And I know that you mentioned very briefly there was some things around in our private chat around that 8.8 billion kind of deal that's been made for South Africa. Do you want to just sort of expand on that a bit and also just give some perspective on the investability of Africa?
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire. Just on that, maybe let's start on that 8.8 billion. Yeah, it has been sort of what we are aware that there is 8.8 billion. At this point in time, the government is still sorting out how this 8.8 billion is going to be allocated, whether all of it will be allocated to Eskom as a utility or whether it will be allocated to other utilities as well. But now within the organization, we will then decide once we know what is the portion for allocation, how then that then filters down to the divisions. But in terms of the investability, I think the fact that we do even have this pledge of an 8.8 billion actually speaks for itself to say that the country is investable. There is a lot of opportunities and scope for investment in the country. Yes, we do have a stable political system. I think the government themselves, they've made certain pronouncements around the energy sector and the fact that we have to embrace this just energy transition. I think we will have a stable regulator that obviously regulates the market. We got this view that I think over time we're probably going to have a two-tier market, with one which is regulated and now another one which is really unregulated, and that will depend on the speed of the introduction of more and more IPPs. So yeah, I think we've got a fairly large infrastructure that covers the length and breadth of the country, and from distribution viewpoint, I happen to have the pleasure of running the grid access unit that manages the grid connections from anybody that wants to connect to the grid. So any investor that's got that is willing to invest, obviously then they need to go through me to get connected to the grid. I think beyond that, we've also got these off-grid solutions that we are currently rolling out, and again that has been sort of well endorsed by government with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. So yeah, I think Claire, in a nutshell, it just talks about the scale of opportunities. We've also through the our shareholder Ministry of Public Enterprise, we've also made available land that is ESCOM owned to any private players that will come and put up their power plant, and we'll also give them a grid connection. So I think we're trying to obviously fast track additional availability of electricity on the grid, but also to stimulate the economy, and also to stimulate the transition towards embracing more renewables. So I think in 1 minute that covers the story. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Maybe Claire, just one thought that I just had about Tunisia that might be interesting to share is that I just talked about a little bit about the government, but however, it could be also interesting to go more on a local level. And when I was talking to the mayor of Tunis, she was very interested in, let's say, having some projects, let's say, in the city of Tunis, especially new developments. So sometimes maybe it's not so important to go to the government, but sometimes you can go to mayors or that are quite active, that are very efficient, and that have some great ideas. And this might be also interesting. So it's just a little thought that I just wanted to, let's say, throw into the debate.
Yeah, I think that is important, and sometimes that acts as a bit of a spur to other regions or such like.
It could be a good model that others will then copy afterwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Vigotti, so do you have your hand up? Would you like to say something?
Yes, can I? I've been listening very carefully. Thank you so much. I want to bring back a couple of topics that refer to my intervention. First of all, I didn't mention, but we made 2 studies called Connecting the Dots. Now, the 2 studies show something that Mr. Timmerman really was shocked. We proved that in the last 10 years, out of the global deployment renewable, only 2% happen in Africa, and only 0.5%, 0.5% in the MENA region, in the Middle East. So we are very optimistic. We really talk a lot about next target, but the reality check is that you can download those books from the website. Is only 2% all Africa. So why we do Agenda 2060? Let's be careful. We start from nothing, and therefore let's be sure. Second, the utility issue. The utility are still monopolistic. The only utility in Africa who is profitable is Umeme from Uganda, is private sector there. The other one all bankrupt by one reason, because the main states prefer to have a utility under control, being non-cost effective tariffs, or because they have social duties. So we need actually to call again, and let me say again, the public and private sector should work together. And when I mean private, I don't mean Italian or European. Also, African private sector should be there, because they are the only one who can, without waiting too much for the unbundling. I talked to Gunda. I made a study 2 years ago with Mr. Elafidi, opening of the medium voltage in Morocco. I was presented 3 years ago in Marrakesh, still there, because it's, as you said, it's very difficult to open the medium voltage for the reason you mentioned. So I think only by accepting the private sector, not only European or worldwide, but also African, join the utility, they will move something. Because the way they are, and we cannot wait the unbundling because it takes ever. So we propose also in our position paper that I show you, and I invite you again to come on the 14th of February on webinar in Brussels to discuss this, is we can also provide different models for accelerating the issue. I don't talk about only about ownership. We can have a stewardship. We can have also a minority role of private sector, provided they have a medium long-term, let's say, contract. Okay, I accept being 30% of utility there, but I have a 20 years contract to supply technology to supply. And this is called stewardship model. Also, we have additional issue. For instance, in Mexico, just say, Mexico did not unbundle, but they were able to build, sell, and operate. They made 800 megawatt or almost 1 gigawatt of renewable, but because it was too much, they say, okay, this company will do the design, buy the components, it will operate then, and the owner, well, they sell immediately, because when you have a long traditional utility, doing the design, buying the components, and doing the operation, anybody can buy. So these are some innovation, because we cannot wait until the utility becomes unbundled. And also, of course, we also asking Brussels, please, when you are going now in the next semester to define a new de-risking instrument, consider also infrastructure de-risking investment, because scaling solar was nice, pioneering, brave, not much impactful. Now IFC is doing scaling wind, but nobody does scaling grids. So I think we have to insist that covering also the grids is strictly, it's like I said before, if you buy a car, you need a road to go there. So again, we're asking Brussels, DG INTPA, and the European Investment Bank to provide the risky investment also. And therefore, these are my thoughts. The most essential thing now is injecting private sector, not only money, but technicality, expertise to expand the acceleration. So I invite you, all of you, to come on the 14th of February online in Brussels for this 1 hour and a half meeting. By the way, there'll be a lot of African also utility, including UMM. Sorry to make some commercial, but I think my point, in addition to the wonderful point you did, is let's move and let's remember 2% only in 10 years. What are we talking about?
I completely agree with you, sir, and I think that it is something that needs to be addressed. Monde, I hate to put you on the spot here, and if you don't want to answer, please, just say so. But Eskom has been accused of exactly some of these things, being reluctant to have people joining in the power sector, making it difficult for IPPs. Not now, obviously, but a couple of years ago, that was definitely the impression. Can you perhaps just give some idea of what's changed? Why has Eskom's position, I think, changed?
Yeah, Claire, I wouldn't say it's a change as much. Yeah, I think throughout the other bid windows, Claire, we've obviously learned our lessons through bid window 1 up to 5. So yes, I think that has as we grow, we learn and we review our processes. A lot of the things that Eskom has been accused of are things that were outside of Eskom's control, by the way. All bids, they go through the IPP office, and the IPP office is the one that administers it. All that we do a grid connection. And yes, we were put in a situation whereby we were the single buyer, a situation that we would like reviewed, and we're currently in conversation with government to say Eskom should not be a single buyer. But also what has changed is that I think there's acknowledgement that load shedding has done a lot of damage to the country and the economy of the country, and with that, we really want to accelerate whatever means possible to ensure that we get additional electricity onto the grid, so as to avoid load shedding. But obviously, in doing so, we also need to be mindful of the economics around it, and just really because it becomes a challenge. So I would say that those are the two major changes. But I think there is this realization that we cannot do it on our own, and we don't want to do it on our own, and hence us being very much open to public sector participation in this space. We do see ourselves as the country's major generator of electricity for some time into the future. However, we want that to diminish as time goes on. But having said that, I think just introducing competition, introducing other role players will actually be good for the country. So we think this is positive development, and we welcome whoever is willing to come and partner with us in moving forward. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot there a little bit. I have been given my 5-minute call, and so what I would like to do is ask our speakers to just give me, and literally in 1 minute, please, for you, the most important takeaways from today's discussion. Claudio, let's start with you, and then we'll go Claudio, Kurt, Gunnar, Monde to end. So, Claudio, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Well, the take of today, it's for me that it's quite clear from the discussion of today that everyone recognizes the need and the necessity to deliver energy access to all as soon as possible for the sake of economical development of Africa, as well as for the health of our businesses. And the way to do that is through a very tight cooperation, first of all, between all the stakeholder, multi-stakeholder approach, either in the off-grid spaces and in the grid-connected space, as well a very good cooperation, as hopefully we started with this fantastic conversation with whoever works in the off-grid and whoever works in a grid-connected space, and address this issue, which is ultimately an issue for the humanity as a whole, access to energy poverty. And the only way to address it is to work together as a common sector, not a divided one. That's my hope.
I like that very much. Kurt?
Yeah, thanks. I obviously share some of Claudio's aspirations there. And I think the important aspect to me is that I do believe that the technology exists to translate the landscape. So I think to a large extent, I think we need to make sure that we translate the opportunities. We need to get the political will. We need to make sure that the investment opportunities and the market and business structures are put together in such a way that we're able to transform Africa into a powerhouse. And also very important that we start to break the poverty cycle that we see so evident in Africa. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a particularly good point. We're never going to succeed if more than half of our population are being held back by poverty. Gunnar, from you?
Yes, I have 3 points. Note, the first one will be that new technologies, or let's say cost reduction in the technologies like storage and photovoltaics, they will be offering us a lot of possible solutions for the challenges that are in Africa, both on and off grid. I think, let's say storage, I think is something that will help the network operator, that will also help somebody in a rural area that is off the grid. I think that's the first one. The second one is that DSOs, or let's say utilities in general, should see themselves as a facilitator, as a service provider, and service provider not only to the consumer, but maybe also to somebody who's producing, let's say, a small scale PV or something like this. So that is, I think, this cultural change is quite important. And then yeah, it's a little bit an issue here that sustainability is, from European point of view, or let's say from Western point of view, is often seen as like a one dimension. And I like to say that for Africa, for many countries, there's more than just one dimension. We have all the social components, also economical components. I think this is something that we must remind ourselves of. I mean, it's not only about the environment, it's also about participation, about social issues, and so on, all the access debate and these kind of things. It's good when we can save the environment, because of course photovoltaics and so on are good for that, but we must not forget the other dimension. So this is particular in the West, something we must not forget. That's my take.
Very good point there, yeah, very good point. And Monde, last but certainly not least, your most important takeaway.
No, thanks, Claire, and thanks to the colleagues. I certainly have really enjoyed my time with you guys. My key takeaway is that we have an opportunity to change lives. we have an opportunity to transform communities, and we should really utilize whatever technologies at our disposal to do just that. I think in the South African context, we are at the crossroads in terms of how this industry is going, and we're really open for business. We're open to talk to whoever is willing to talk to us to say how best can we traverse this journey, and yeah, I'm looking forward to having subsequent discussions with some people on the call, just to guide us through. Obviously, some of the countries and the continents are far ahead than us, and I'm willing really to listen and to learn. But yeah, I think we are open for business. Thank you, Claire.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation as much as we have. And Roberto, without any further ado, I'm going to hand back to you, and thank you for having us today.
Yes, and it is always me thanking you all. Great panelist, great moderator, and thank you very much for having given an insight which is seldom to be heard around the webinars in the recent months, and I would say even years in Europe, and especially from Brussels. Brussels. So with us for the concluding remarks, Domenico Rosa. Domenico is head of unit for strategic partnership with Africa and with the ACP at the G International Partnership, and is obviously part of the European Commission, and is a long-time expert on these kind of topics, and a great negotiator at international level as well. So, Domenico, we are talking Africa. It is just 1/3 of your job description, but I think that it is an extremely significant third. So this is to you, to your recent experience, and to your evaluation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Roberto, and thank you for your kind introductory words. Well, I would first of all to thank the E.DSO and EPRI and Eurelectric for this invitation. As you said, well, Africa is not 1/3, is my full job, if I may say. Where in Africa, and talking about strategic partnership, of course, the strategic partnership that is on energy is one of the most relevant, and is going to become one of the most relevant for the future. You know that with the adoption of the EU Green Deal back at the beginning of this Commission mandate, we are fully engaged and committed in deliver in the external dimension of the Green Deal, because the Green Deal cannot succeed internally if it succeeds also outside. Otherwise, we remain a kind of, I would say, a beautiful European exercise, even if it's our industrial policy for the future. And I think that it's very important that this external dimension of the Green Deal is applied in Africa, where the Africa case requires, I think, a different element compared to the European one. And of course, they need to build on a more reliable power system with greater focus on transmission and distribution assets that are, I would say, the core business of your gathering. And in this sense, Africa needs to significant scale up investment in the energy sector, both in production, but also in generation, but also in grids that are at the moment for both aspect are ranking among the lowest in the world. When it comes specifically to the distribution system operators, the electricity distribution network, in my view, will get increasingly attention and will come under the spotlight as the green transition will gather pace. Distribution networks, in particular in Africa, are entering in a new era of change, and adaptation will require energy transition of all the electricity system. Distribution networks have done an excellent job in Europe. I think that everybody can testify of this, and but the nature is not changing also in Europe, but I think that this is going to change also in Africa. And when I talk about Africa, I talk all Africa, so the sub-Saharan Africa, but also the MENA region. I think that is also that as energy transition gather pace, electricity system will become more and more about bottom up than rather than the previous model where there was largely a top-down approach. And the optimization will take place more and more at the level of the end user, meaning that in this case, the DSO will have a bigger role to play. I think that to successfully navigate the shift, the distribution system will need to embrace changes in their role and structure while exploring the world of digitalization and innovation to manage their network. From our perspective, the question is, what can we do to support DSO business model in a region of sub-Saharan Africa, which such a tremendous deficit in the access to energy? Particular attention in our future strategy will, I would say, given to the modernization and reinforcement of almost all distribution networks, including digitalization, control, and operation facility, and the demand of the site management tools. And second, the mobilization of a huge investment to achieve the above mentioned intense modernization of the DSO infrastructure. As I mentioned, we are now a little bit at a turning point in our relation with Africa. You know that there is the upcoming summit that now is confirmed that is going to take place in Brussels, 16 and 18 of February in presence, where we hope that we will be able to renew the partnership that we have with Africa and upscale to a higher level of interaction and reciprocity. The idea is to move from the old vision of Africa as a continent of problem into a new era of Africa as a continent of opportunity. And I think that Africa is full of opportunity because there is a huge potential for development, the development that is needed for the Africa industrialization, if I may say, because and also for the development of Africa continental value chain in order to create the internal African market. That is one also of the other big projects of the continent for the next decades. As the part of this investment package that we are going to present to our partners during the summit, there is the Africa-Europe Green Energy Initiative that will be launched as a support to the investment in the energy sector. In financial terms, we can estimate that the EU could contribute for 1.7 billion for the period 2021-2024, and will most probably reach 2.4 billion for the whole financial framework that is covered in 2021-2027. So by including, of course, in this amount, the capitals that we could crowd in by the use of the guarantees, and therefore by de-risking specific investment in areas, geographic and sectoral, that where the market would make the investment not so palatable. In terms of areas of intervention, I think that we aim at focusing on 4 main building blocks. The first one is as I said, increasing the energy production and the access to energy. I think that this is the basic, because without energy production and access to energy, there are little that can be done. Then to move into a sustainable energy uses and therefore increase the efficiency in the use of the energy. Third one is the sector reform that should try to head towards a conducive regulatory framework for the private investment. But I think that the rules that need to be clear for the investor in the energy sector. And last but not least, and this I think is a long-term endeavor and objective, is the market integration that will start most probably at the sub-regional level and then could move at the higher level, but in a longer term. As a part of this area of intervention and in the relation with your core business, we would like to focus in particular in the support of the transformation of the electricity utilities, in tackling energy-specific barriers to undistorted trade and investment in the energy sector, improve connectivity to enable the increase of core cross-border energy trade, and last but not least, the support of the interconnection between the 2 continents for an increased trade of decarbonized energy, considering that the Africa has an enormous potential in terms of, I would say, renewable energy production, and is a potential that is largely untapped for the time being. Let me conclude by saying that we see clearly the potential of the energy sector in Africa, and we would like to work back to back with the private sector. The energy sector is definitely something that is in the hand of the private investors, is not, I would say, was not traditionally the core of our development of cooperation, but is becoming more and more relevant, because without electricity there is no development, if I may say, and it's difficult also to think that we can achieve, as I mentioned at the beginning, our internal goal in terms of Green Deal and its objective. And I think that now we are in the run-up of the summit. We hope that from the African side there will be an appropriate answer to this, I would say, offer in moving forward with sustainable energy. And then once we have this, I would say, kind of alliance or partnership on energy is endorsed by the head of state, then I think that we can move into its implementation. And I think that in this sense, the relation with the business forum that we are organizing in parallel to the summit is of paramount importance, because I think that we cannot move into this area without having the constant and permanent feedback of the private sector, as well as without listening about what are the main challenges and where are the problems that the private sector is facing when they would like to develop energy transmission grids. I will stop here because I understand that your morning was rather busy and we are close to the lunch time. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish you all the success for your future activity. So thank you.
Thank you, Domenico. Thank you, Domenico, for your words, and thank you for having put in a really interesting framework your consideration. And before closing, just a consideration. I receive every morning a newsletter from the African Legal Network, and which is Africa This Morning. Well, when it started a couple of years back, my subscription to this newsletter, it was 2 pages. Today's edition is 6 pages. And this tells a lot about the pace and the speed of evolution. I would like to wish everybody that the same pace of evolution might be kept also for the energy grids and for the electrification of the country, opening access to all citizens for certainly it is a task 2030, and it is anyway a great objective, a great target to be achieved. This said, thank you, everybody. It's not easy to have 1 day and a half with a good number of participants and qualified participants. If you scroll the participant list of this event, you see a lot of influential names as far as the relations Europe, Africa, and global Africa are concerned. Institutions, nations, and people joined maybe for part of the event and had other constraints and left it. But it was a great series of sessions with accumulated maximum peak of over 300 registries. So thank you, everybody, for the participation. Thank you, the speakers. Thank you, the panelists. Thank you, the marvelous staff of EPRI and E.DSO. Thank you, Eurelectric, for the support and the conclusion yesterday. And see you next time. So this is the second one. And the third one, as I said, will become a tradition. Let's hope for the better with the same degree of challenging topics on the floor. Thank you very much.